Good morning to all our valued partners and welcome to our webinar, Hot Talk with Peter Todd. We appreciate your time and support and hope that you are healthy and safe. For those of you who I have not met in person yet, I'm Heidi Dias, Executive of Distribution and Claims. As recently communicated, my portfolio will be changing to Executive Marketing and Distribution from 1 August, and as part of our recent organizational restructuring, is one of the topics that will be discussed today. So as mentioned in our webinar invitation, the only constant in life is change. There are a lot of exciting changes underway at Constantia, none more so than the appointment of our CEO, Peter Todd, who has been in the hot seat for the past 4 months. Now, many of you will know that Peter is no stranger to the insurance industry. Having held several executive positions within the industry, both locally and abroad. Peter is a former CEO of Mutual and Federal and more recently served as chairman of Standard Insurance Limited before joining Constantia as a non-executive director in 2017. Peter has also served on various industry boards, including SAIA, and is a former president of the IISA. Welcome, Peter. In line with our mantra, Insurance Made Personal, ongoing communication and dialogue with our partners is vitally important to us, which is why we have scheduled this webinar today. To aid the flow of the discussion, we have combined similar questions and bucketed them into themes, and Peter will answer as many as possible during the time allocated. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce you to a dynamic lady who's very passionate about our industry, Lizelle van der Merwe, CEO of the Financial Intermediaries Association, who has kindly agreed to interview Peter today. Welcome, Lizelle. It's wonderful to have you with us today.
Thanks, Heidi, and I think, very warm welcome, to all the participants attending this webinar today. As Heidi said, I'm the representative of the insurance brokers in our industry, so I'm really hoping to get as much out of Peter Todd in the next hour and a half as what I can. And a lot of what we will be discussing today, as Heidi said, is really based on what you guys want to hear and the questions that you've asked. So, let's get the process going. I chatted to Peter earlier this week, and he said to me, nothing is off limits. He wants this conversation to be as free-flowing and as authentic as possible. And I thought, Peter, that's either very brave or very irresponsible. But you're lucky because your social media, or should I say, your social media is outdated. So I couldn't find anything on you to really put you on the seat today. But I think just to get to know you a little bit better, you've been, as Heidi says, in the industry for more than 20 years, both in South Africa and abroad. What inspired you to take up the position as CEO of Constantia in these very difficult times?
Hi, Lizelle, thanks. And I think also welcome to everybody on the call. As you rightly said, nothing is scripted, so I hope we have a free and open conversation. And then in that way, we sort of will hopefully get to answer all the questions. But coming to your question, what inspired me? I've been in the industry since I left the legal profession pretty early on. And I'm one of those who, sadly, I suppose, in our industry, we have a lot of people who feel that they kind of fell in the industry because, it wasn't by choice. I joined the industry by choice. So I've always been very passionate and outspoken about, what a great industry I think we do have, and the important role we actually play in our society. So in that sense, I guess that, any opportunity for me where I feel that can make a difference is something that I would pursue. So I've worked most of my career actually as a broker, in the broking side. So I've got a very good understanding, I think, of the challenges that brokers face. I've worked abroad, as you mentioned, in Asia, and I've run big companies like Mutual and Federal. And Constantia, offers something different. As a small player, very much intermediated, partner-driven insurer, and having been on the board of Constantia as a non-exec for a couple of years before stepping into the void, I had a pretty good understanding of the business, and hence the opportunities that lie in this business. So, I'm not by any means suggesting that it's not going to be a challenge. We definitely have our challenges, as any company does at any point in time. That's also, for me, part of the challenge, is to take on those challenges. But if I didn't see opportunity, then I don't think I would be taking the challenge.
So Peter, when you look at insurance made personal, so you've mentioned that you like the fact that Constantia is a smaller business, it's a smaller insurer than Old Mutual, it's intermediated. Can you maybe sort of then link that to the insurance made personal, and how that speaks to your role as the CEO?
Yeah, absolutely. I for me, looking at the Constantia business, it's about partnerships. That's been our success in the past, and that's what we really need to be focused on going forward. So, how do we co-create value as partners? And, again, that comes down to relationships. How do we build those strong interpersonal relationships, business relationships, and I think one always has to, in a relationship, understand that, value needs to be shared value. And we should be sitting with our partners, spending more time with our partners, saying, how can we help you in your business? How can we help you grow your business? And I think that's where the personal aspect of it comes in. Too many times, businesses in my view, make a mistake where, they'll dream up ideas or dream up the next big thing and then go into the market and try and flog it to the market. For me, I would rather be engaging with our partners and say, you tell us, you are the guys on the front end, what should we be doing differently? Where is the demand in the market? As opposed to trying to, guess that ourselves and then push down what we want, through a pipe, then it doesn't fit. So to me, that's the relationship side, and obviously that's the personal element, I guess, that comes in. How we build those relationships.
So we'll talk a little bit about the broker-partner relationships a bit later, but I think regarding the business, so if we can touch a little bit about, touch on the changes that have happened within Constantia since, sort of late last year. The Trustco acquisition, so maybe you can just touch a little bit about, what is the status of that acquisition, and what that actually means to the organization?
Yeah, so Trustco for us, is an opportunity to strengthen our balance sheet. They're the largest listed entity in Namibia. They don't have a South African presence. They have in the past, been interested in, coming into this market, and they've had a failed attempt in the past. So, for them, clearly the growth prospects in Namibia are quite limited, just given the size of the economy. And, they, as I said, very entrepreneurial business, and actually their business came out of insurance. That's where they started. And, they've grown from there into all sorts of other fields. They're busy restructuring their business into financial services, non-financial services. They also own a banking license in Namibia. And so for them, obviously, South Africa is a natural area to grow further. And through Constantia, they see the opportunity with multiple licenses that we have, having a presence. And from a Constantia perspective, it will significantly strengthen our balance sheet. It will make us part of, a much larger organization. And, it's a great scenario for us because, there's no local integration that's required. There's no local business that we now have to, restructure in terms of that. So it's really business as usual from our perspective. But behind us, we will sit with a strong partner with a very entrepreneurial culture and mindset, which will hopefully fuel a lot of growth for us. So we're in the sort of getting close to the final throes of the process, but it's a very long, complicated process because, besides being regulated entities, we both groups are listed on the stock exchange in Joburg, and they're also Namibia listings. So there's all sorts of complexity in terms of those processes, but we're almost at the end of those processes. So we expect certainly by the end of the third quarter, we expect to have transactions completed.
So Peter, I don't know if I can say it's business as usual. I think, one of the questions that I saw come through from the partners was, with every acquisition or with every new shareholder comes a change of business strategy. And I think, this is really a great opportunity for you to maybe tell us a little bit about what is the strategy for the business? What is your strategy? What changes do you see in the short and the long term now that Trustco are on board?
It's been an interesting time for me to take over. I took over sort of middle of February, and pretty much a month later we went into lockdown. So strategic planning has been quite a challenge. I actually did jump on an aeroplane a couple of weeks ago and spent a few days with the team in Joburg because I live in Cape Town, in Constantia of all places. But just to try and have a strategic conversation online is very difficult. So it was a good productive 2 days. And really for me, it's about going back to that partner focus in our business. I think we've lost our way a bit in trying to do too many things, and we were trying to develop all sorts of fancy products without really understanding, again, what is the demand, where is the need, how are we going to take those products to market. And for me, I think that if we focus on our partners and we see how we can empower our partners and help them grow their business, that's how we will grow our business. And that's traditionally how Constantia has grown. So if you look then at how we've restructured the business, it really reflects that, because we had sort of grown, we had sort of grown a cost structure which was there to support, a business, that was based on us growing our own business, sort of on platform as opposed to working through our partners. So our focus, is going to be on those partnerships. How do we make it easier to work with Constantia? And, the big advantage that Constantia has over one of the big insurers is agility. Is that ability to make decisions. We don't have layers and layers in our structures. But if we don't take advantage of that agility, and we don't have the systems and the people in place, then that's a lost opportunity. So, that's really about focusing on the partners, making sure that we know what they need, and then how do we fulfill that.
In terms of the restructuring, can you maybe touch on what the impact of the restructure would be on Constantia itself? So when you talk about sort of the reorganizing of the business, does that involve internal structures within the organization, or is that purely an external focus on business partners and how you engage with them going forward?
No, Lizelle, there's been significant change internally in terms of the structures. So we've certainly become leaner and meaner. At the same time, there's been in that process, obviously, is trying to make sure that we have, from a structure perspective, the right structures to support our partners. So, if just as an example, if we have, our partners working through binders where they are fulfilling functions, we don't need to duplicate that or replicate that in our own organization. Yep. So, that's where we've removed a lot of that in terms of, people. And then it's about making sure then, how do we, when we empower our partners to fulfill binder functions on our behalf, how do we monitor and play our role in terms of that from a regulatory perspective and just from a general kind of control perspective? So that's where some of our focus is shifting, and obviously technology plays a big big role in that. We know how complicated that can be in our industry, but we have some ideas. We're working on a few things in that space. So it's really about being leaner and meaner and a bit more focused in terms of our strategy.
Okay, so if we look at the financial position of Constantia, I think, that's been a very hot topic. It certainly has been a concern raised by a lot of brokers. And I think, the COVID-19 pandemic and the current economic situation is probably, just placed even more sort of, more challenges on the table than what there was sort of pre the COVID-19 crisis. So we're expecting GDP to shrink by 7%, okay, in the next year. As a result, we know that the working class South Africans are going to face a drastic fall in income. Municipalities anticipate a 30% drop in revenues, which will constrain their ability to provide basic infrastructure to industries and households. Many small businesses, are going to be shut. And we know that the tourism and the hospitality sector is probably one of the most vulnerable sectors. So in light of that and the concerns that have been raised around Constantia's financial performance pre-COVID-19, can you tell us if things have improved and what the strategy is around that? I mean, you mentioned that Trustco will strengthen your balance sheet, but maybe you just want to give us some detail.
Yeah. So Lizelle, I will answer that, and I promise you this is not an excuse to dodge the question, but we are in a closed period. We are a June year-end part of a listed entity. So obviously I can't give any specifics, but I think just to make the point that, our past financial performance, there are really two aspects one has to look at. And the one is that, in terms of our balance sheet, we sit with a lot of listed equities on our balance sheet. So that obviously has taken a major knock as the markets have declined. So as those equities values fall, we take a financial loss on the income statement, which is not related to the underwriting performance or the trading of the business. Over time, as those equities recover, we will have the reverse effect. So that's created a lot of volatility in our balance sheet. And that's not great. And that's something obviously we will address through the Trustco transaction because it will alleviate that problem for us. But then in terms of underlying performance, just to say that, yes, everything is pointing in the right direction despite COVID. So, from that perspective, our business, has been reasonably resilient. And I think it's true, of the intermediated market, it tends to be at a slightly different LSM. And so, yes, we do see some drop off and we do expect that as well going forward. But it's not, it's not at the same levels as, I guess, some of the other players in the market that might have a greater exposure to lower LSMs. We might be harder hit through this. So we expect our business to be a bit more resilient. Also bear in mind that a big part of our business is health. In that space, in the gap business, you would expect that at a stage like this, when you're in the middle of a health crisis, people will hang on to their health cover. And gap is more for it's not for COVID type of illnesses and so on. It's more for procedures, whether it's particularly elective. So the majority of the claims will come through in terms of elective procedures. So we will see a lag in terms of that coming through. But that does sort of allow does help us a bit. But at the same time, we've also given back. I think as a percentage wise, across our businesses, we are probably there or thereabouts with the rest of the insurers, if you take it as a percentage of gross premium in terms of what we have given back across the various parts of our business. And if we weren't in a financial position to do that, clearly we wouldn't have done it. So I think that talks to the sort of positive turnaround we are seeing in the business. But yes, it certainly is, it's still a long journey from where we want it to be, absolutely, but we are moving in the right direction.
So can you sort of share with us what challenges you think you're going to face from a long-term perspective with regards to your investment strategy?
Yeah, I think it's the opportunities that it's going to be hard to come by. And I think that's also for me why it's so important for us to focus on the partners in our business, and to work with them to look for opportunities and help them as well. All of us on this call, we're in business to grow and prosper. So how do we, the relationships that we do have, by focusing on those relationships, how do we work together to achieve that? There's no doubt it'll be mutually beneficial. Trying to go out into the market and look for new avenues or develop new relationships, new partnerships is going to be hard work, just because of the state of the economy. I think people are more focused on what they've got and how they can make more from what they've got. That I think the growth is going to be the big challenge for everyone. Our restructuring wasn't as a result of COVID. It was necessitated by where the business was in terms of performance, also just in terms of that strategy, to become more focused on partners and not trying to sort of build our own empire in that sense. But fortunately, again, that has sort of created a buffer for us through the sort of longer term knock-on effects from COVID, because we've already done all that hard work. And that is a hard, obviously there's a financial component to doing that as well. Never a pleasant process to have to go through in any organization. And I hope that, we don't have to ever do that again if we grow the business. But be that as it may, we've done that. And so therefore, that does make us a little bit more resilient.
So Peter, staying with the topic of COVID-19, I saw that some of the brokers really wanted to get some insights into what has Constantia done for customers during this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, I think what we've done is similar to, as I say, to what the rest have done in the market. So in terms of premium relief and that sort of thing, it's different in different parts of our business. Obviously everybody is affected differently. So we have taken a more targeted approach as opposed to just a broad brush approach. So there will be businesses that actually are benefiting from a COVID scenario. So in those cases, we would be not looking to give premium relief, etc., to them, because our others are harder hit. We also have, as you know, very big medical malpractice business. And most of that is focused on specialists, and elective surgery has almost come to a complete, or elective surgery I think has come to a complete halt. And a lot of their business is elective work, so that's had a big impact. We've helped them there. We still we haven't finished in the terms of that process, because we are in this moving target, and as we go along we have to balance everything. We have to balance our own financial situation versus the pressure that our clients are under. But I think the point is we spent a lot of time looking at how we can help. In our health business as well, we've provided help outside of just the premium side of things as well, in terms of additional services, value-added services that we are providing for free to customers in that space. So we have spent a lot of time, and we will continue to do so, because we just don't know what the longer term effects are going to be. But certainly I would expect that for the balance of this year, I can't see ourselves being back to normal, certainly. So we will keep looking at the situation and helping where we can.
Okay, so Peter, how do you see then the industry evolving from the pandemic crisis, and sort of how prepared is Constantia for that? So I think we certainly acknowledge that it's business unusual, that things are not going to go back to the way they were, probably never will go back to the way they were. You spoke about digitalization, you spoke about a more intimate relationship with your partners going forward, you spoke about strategies to grow the business. So taking this all into account, how do you see the industry evolving, and particularly Constantia responding to the customers and brokers at this time?
Yeah, so Lizelle, maybe just touch on the industry, because I think that's an important question. and being a passionate proponent of the industry and understanding how critical our industry is to our economy, and that's actually playing itself out if one considers, the business interruption contingent BI issue that's playing out in the media at the moment. Again, businesses are under pressure. They're looking towards the insurance industry to obviously support them through that based on policy wordings, and clearly it's a highly technical issue, and I'm happy to answer questions on that, and I can share my views to the extent that you're interested. But the point I really want to make is that, when the industry, goes through a crisis, or the economy goes through a crisis like that, and the industry has responded, in history, time and time again. We think of the major storms that we've had in our country. We think of the fires. The industry has paid out billions. And sadly, though, we never get credit for that. It's when we don't pay a claim that, we get nailed as an industry. And all of us, we tend to take that personally in the industry as well. And I've always been one to sort of say we should be doing more to talk about the good things that we do in the industry. Again, we look at a crisis like this, we don't know what the next crisis is going to be, and how we respond. So if I think about brokers as an advisory capacity and the advice that they give to clients, it's a good question, because what conversations are you having with your clients now? Because the risks will change. So as businesses start to evolve and work more remotely, and make use of online tools, etc., it opens up a whole other can of worms in terms of risk exposure. And therefore, as an industry, how are we geared for that? Do we actually understand those risks? How do we advise our clients? And I know I'm talking to a lot of brokers on this call, and I'm sure that a lot of them are probably getting pressure from their clients, who, again, just coming back to this business interruption issue, when, we know that certain other insurers in the market, in the direct space, have come out and said, well, we'll pay all of our claims, and are simplifying a complex issue. We don't know what those wordings are. And obviously, this exposure is relatively small. So it's much easier if you've got a relatively small exposure to say, well, we've paid all of our claims. But no doubt that puts pressure on the broker to say, well, why should I bother with a broker? I'll just go to those guys because they pay their claims. And in fact, I think that poses a major risk to customers, because you can hop over the fence, but guess what? You're not going to have that extension under your policy anyway. So that's the first question you need to ask yourself. But in doing so, if you don't have the right advice, it's about what is next, and what are the conversations that you're having with your insurer, with your broker, about what are my exposures going forward? How do I need to look differently at my risk? So I think a knee-jerk reaction from customers is dangerous, and it is highly emotive at the moment. But therein lies, to me, the opportunity for brokers, because we should be shaping those opportunities together, consulting with the clients, understanding their risks, and then coming up with solutions. So, and if you just think about, if you think about major events in the past, in our history, you think how, you take big nuclear disasters like Chernobyl, and how that changed the insurance industry. 9/11, those sort of events, how changed the industry. Political riot in South Africa, how that changed the industry. On Sazria. So again, I think out of COVID, it's likely to create, change the way that the industry works as well. And then it's about just staying ahead of that curve. How Constantia fits into that, we're a player in the broader industry, so we will have to play our part. It's often more difficult for the smaller insurers. We often take the lead from the larger insurers, but I think there's always opportunity, and it's about understanding risk better and understanding how we then manage that risk. The other thing about, about risk and claims in general is that, no client actually wants to have to claim under their policy, because, you never, after a major disaster, you don't get the full recovery from an insurance policy. So the insurance policy doesn't, it pays back the financial loss, tries to put you back in a position, but the knock-on effects beyond that for any business, it's just impossible to cover that. So it's about actually avoiding risk. And at the end of the day, the insurance is there when you haven't, you've avoided it to a certain point. So it's also about understanding all that risk mitigation. That's important as well. And that it's not just a case of passing the buck, onto the insurers, because, at the end of a major disaster or a major claim, getting back into business and up and running again and trading will always take longer and be more difficult. So it's not a situation that any business would want to find itself in. A very long-winded answer, but I hope it gives you a sense of where we are.
I think one of the questions that brokers often have is, why are the insurers not more in the media talking about the role of insurance, the impact that insurance has in terms of economic recovery and growth, that it is a catalyst, actually. Without insurance, there can be no economic recovery. When you talk about the billions of rands that have been paid back to customers, this whole negative this whole negative media message around the industry is not paying BI claims, etc. Do you think that insurers like Constantia can be doing more to be in the media and assisting brokers? Because brokers are the guys who are on the front line with that customer. They are the ones who are having to manage the customer expectations, stay in touch with the client, give them an update. And the client is influenced, as you say, it's highly emotive. They're influenced by what they see in the media. Do you think that insurers can be doing more to position the value of insurance and intermediation with customers?
Lizelle, sorry, I had a technical glitch. So I lost you for a bit there, but I just caught the back end of the question. Okay. I'm not sure it was specifically around the sort of the BI issue that we were discussing, or more generally. But I think, generally, absolutely, I think there's definitely, more that we should be doing. And again, to me, it comes back to the partnership, and the communication in any partnership is absolutely critical. And, there's no question that I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that, we've got it right, and we will certainly make mistakes going forward, but we must try to improve that. And communication is a two-way thing, so our brokers should be asking us, and we should also be preempting that as much as we can. But again, exactly, if you come to a very technical issue like this BI issue, how good have we been in terms of communication as to what's going on, and where we all stand? And it's different for everybody, because everybody's got a different degree of exposure. They've got different policy wordings. The regulators are grappling with this across the world, and not just in South Africa. But that's a reason to actually have more communication around the issues, because, as you rightly say, the brokers get high and dry. And I've seen commentary on this in on social media, where the brokers get the flack. I saw one comment which said something to the effect that broker, insurance, and ethics don't go together, or something to that effect. We need to protect the brokers by making sure that they are also informed in terms of what our view is and what our stance is on these issues. And similarly, if you think that, again, so I made mention of the fact that, well, if somebody jumps the fence and they go over to our insurance in this example, and they'll find, well, they don't actually have that cover there anymore. That affects the credibility. Now, I'm pretty sure that every insurer, ourselves included, where we've had those exposures, and to whatever extent they've been cancelled. And the reason for that is that it's been cancelled through our treaties and reinsurance programs. So how well is that actually communicated? And how do we communicate that down the chain? And if we don't, the risk is that people will jump to their own conclusions. And sadly, because social media, it's so quick, a lot of support with negative messages out, the damage gets done really, really. So actually the need to communicate effectively and quickly is actually critical. And I have no doubt people on the call are saying, yo, what have you done? And we haven't done enough. So yes, absolutely, we are guilty of that. And we need to get better at communication because it's only going to get tougher.
Peter, thank you for being honest. Really, thank you for being honest about that, because really and truly, we do not do enough as an industry to position the value of insurance with customers. And brokers, even challenge the FIA to say, you guys also need to position the value of the intermediary and the value of advice, the value of having that personal touch. As you say, insurance is highly emotive. And when there's a claim, you want to speak to somebody. You want to be able to know that there's knowledge and expertise on the other end of that call, that there's people there to assist and guide. So I really think as an industry, it's something we should take away from this discussion and really be challenged to position it for what it is. And that no economy will survive without insurance. Stable and sustainable insurance industry. We really need to use that to position ourselves in a positive light with customers. Just as sort of a last point on this pandemic, do you have any ideas, an insurer, what the quantum of the exposure is on the BI side? And do you think that these kinds of risks will be covered in the future? So what are Constantia's thoughts on that? And then potentially maybe a general insurer view.
Yeah, it's hard to obviously accurately estimate. I mean, from what I've seen, out in the market, based, I guess, on sort of claimants and people making certain assumptions, is that it could be north of 100 billion. Now, if you consider that there are probably, there are only a limited number of insurers that actually play in that space, in terms of commercial and offering, business interruption. You then start to narrow that down 100 billion across. It is clearly devastating. The last quarter industry, sort of results that the Prudential Authority publishes, basic own funds of the industry, was only around 70 billion, on the balance sheets, so you think about it, it is catastrophic, which is exactly why the regulators and everybody is actively involved. And as I say, not just in this country, globally, there's a reinsurance impact. It's complex from many, many angles. And, at the same time, if, as you rightly say, if the industry now were to collapse, it would have a massive effect on our economy, because what businesses are going to take on major risk and what investors are going to take on major risk without insurance? I mean, how often, even if you buy a car and have it financed, it's a condition that you must have insurance on that. Now you take that up to levels where, there are large construction projects, and, insurance is always a condition of that. So if you don't have an insurance industry, the economy will not survive. And we never get credit for that as an industry, sadly. But then, we can't sit and necessarily complain about that, because how well are we actually communicating that out in the broader market? I don't think we've got it right yet. And, it's just, again, it becomes a grudge purchase. And that's where, to me, because of my passion for the industry, I just think of the different skill sets as an industry that we employ. Just the moving dynamics, and when my friends ask me about insurance and they say, well, you just steal money from old grannies, that's all you guys do. And then I get into a conversation. Now, when I worked in Asia, so I'm going to digress a little bit, but I arrived in Singapore. I didn't even know what a semiconductor was. And I had to take over, we had a number of semiconductor manufacturers that we were the brokers for. And for those who don't know, that's the microchips that you make. And those plants that make those microchips, the risks associated in the manufacture of those, they have a gas called carbon tetrachloride, just to give you an idea. So now I'm sounding like a true broker. And carbon tetrachloride runs through these massive plants where they produce this stuff in these clean rooms and so on. So they have these pipes running through with carbon tetrachloride in. Anybody who knows what carbon tetrachloride is will know that if that meets oxygen, it explodes. Okay, it explodes. So literally that place will go up in air. So they run it in double pipes. Now you've got that. Then you've got these chemical rooms with all these chemicals and other gases, and you've got I promise you've got like an atom bomb sitting in a building with sums insured in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And I happened to arrive there just after 9/11, and I had to do the renewals. There was no capacity. I mean, our slip, we must have had, almost 20 insurers, reinsurers on our slip, the layers. And I remember having to beg Tokyo Marine for 0.5% to actually get the cover placed. And having arrived there not knowing and getting into, right into the deep end of that situation was clearly a massive learning curve. But, again, it just think about how those kind of businesses, they would never, no one would ever make a microchip if they couldn't get insurance, and then to get that insurance is a highly complex process. So when I would then talk to my friends about, well, having to get 20 insurers, all the different reinsurance layers that we have on this, and then you start to draw the picture, they go, hell, this is flipping complicated. So exactly, it's not just buying, your motor premium online and seeing how cheaply you can get it. It's incredibly complicated. And then we're not even getting into the cover. And what I used to say to those clients as well was, that is, your insurance contract is a legal contract. If you think about it and you think about the role of the broker, and this is absolutely critical when it comes to the role of the broker, is that I can guarantee you now that in every company out there, none of them will have a contract with a value to that contract as high as their insurance policy that they don't have their lawyers pour over, and the lawyers will charge them hundreds of thousands to go through that contract and, tick all the boxes and agree all the terms, et cetera, et cetera. But the insurance contract doesn't, because we rely on the broker in advising the client that they've got to cover, but it's still a legal contract. And if you're sitting with a legal contract where you have an event and that event has to pay out, a few $100 million, now it's $100 million contract. And that's left in the hands of the brokers. So there's massive responsibility on the brokers in terms of performing that job. And again, when we start to look at, how, and in that sort of, in that world, in that space, in that corporate insurance, most of that is fee-driven business for the brokers. But you look at the fees that they will pay the brokers relative to what they would pay lawyers. And then when there is an event, something that happens, guess what? The first people they'll call in is the lawyers who now come and look at the insurance contract. And they'll pay them multiples of what they are paying their broker to put that contract in place in the first place. And there's a disconnect. So again, when we talk about our value in the industry, we actually undersell our value as well. We've commoditized it, sadly, to a point where we're actually destroying value in my sense, and in my view.
Yeah, Peter, I think that was an absolutely valid point that you've just touched on there. And I think that's really something brokers to just be reminded of today, is really understand your value proposition to that customer and how you position that with your clients, because we undersell ourselves. And in the event of claims, the role that we play is invaluable. So I think it's a point very well made. We know that transformation is one of the 5 key strategic objectives of the sector. It's high on the agenda of insurers. It's certainly high on the agenda at the FIA. We know that commission will become a procurement spend at the end of this year. As the CEO of Constantia, what is your philosophy on transformation? Transformation within the industry. If you can just start with that.
Yeah. Look, I think as an industry, to be honest, we've been poor. We've lagged other industries, other sectors, and it's almost now. It feels like there's this sort of heightened pressure. But I think we have to look in the mirror and we have to, face the truth, and that we haven't done enough in the past, and it's easy to make excuses for transformation. So I think there's no doubt. It's an industry issue. It's not just a Constantia issue or individual broker issues. It is an industry issue in terms of, are we attracting the right people to the industry? Again, it comes back to the same question. How do we sell this industry? There are various studies that have been done over the years, where they ask university students, their career choices, and insurance ranks somewhere near the bottom. But I think it's just because there's ignorance. People don't actually understand what a fulfilling industry it can be. So, again, it's about how do we promote that industry. And if people think insurers are bad, then what do they think of banks? But yet everybody wants to go into banking. And maybe that's the perception that people make loads of money in banking, and in insurance they don't. I don't know. But we could do more. So we have to do that. From a Constantia perspective, transformation is very high on our agenda as well. We obviously, in the midst of a transaction, but it's, even, post that, there's no question that we need to look at, and there've already been some work that's been done in the build-up to the Trustco transaction. But post that, we hope to do something there from a, transformation perspective. And it's not just about, what to me is what's interesting is that there are companies out there, large companies that have a level 1, BE, their BE status level 1. But yet, when you work or look at those organizations, you do question whether, how serious is transformation actually taken. So I think there are two parts to it. There is, you can get your score, but then, what is that culture, and have you created a transformed culture in that business? And that's where I think in South Africa we haven't quite got it right yet. So, it's not just about window dressing. Transformation, it must be genuine. So, we have to create the right environments. The whole world has become, politically charged, and, the sensitivities, and we've got a generation, trust me, of youngsters. Any of us who've got, teenage kids will understand that they are far more sensitive to these issues and far more driven and opinionated around, the need for transformation. And they will drive and push it much harder. And, those are future customers as well. So, and they will start to, they will make decisions based on all sorts of criteria. And I've no doubt that transformation will be one of those. So it's an imperative in terms of sustainability as well, that we embrace it and we make sure that transformation is sustainable.
So I see there's a comment here from Terence Williams from Aon, and he says, this is a comment, not a question. He says, transformation is not an industry question, and we cannot keep using the industry as a backdrop for all the challenges. Companies and excos also use the industry to deflect the challenges within their own businesses. And I think it's a point well made, Terence. But I do think we need to be very conscious of the fact that as an industry, we are certainly in the spotlight when it comes to the financial sector codes. We are challenged very often in Parliament regarding the slow pace of transformation as our industry. And I think, if I understand correctly, Terence, what you're saying is that it's not just, we shouldn't just be looking at it from an industry perspective. It should really be something to look at.
Well, as Terence has said, it's a statement. So I guess we're interpreting Terence's statement. But I think the point is that, we can't just say the industry must sort it out. We have to sort it out. But what I'm saying by it's an industry issue is that everybody in the industry is facing the same issue. And, if collectively we can support that transformation, then we will all benefit. So clearly about, how do we attract, more people into the industry, diversity in that sense, the more diverse people into our industry. Actually, what's quite interesting is that for me, is that, certainly from my M&F days, and even in Constantia, and I don't know how it is across other companies, but from a gender diversity perspective, just in terms of sheer numbers, the industry is actually quite well. I mean, there are quite a lot of women who operate in our industry, so we have got it right, potentially in pockets, and I'm generalizing very broadly here because, as I say, it's just purely in terms of numbers, and I don't have that breakdown in terms of levels, etc. So I'm sure that it's not perfect, but again, it means that we can do it if we apply our minds to it. I mean, here we have SAIA and the FIA that are represented by women.
So Peter,
and the Insurance Institute as well. So, and I guess there was a time when people would have said that that's never going to happen. Yeah. So it is a journey, but we can do it.
So Peter, can you tell us a little bit about what Constantia will be doing to help brokers drive transformation? So maybe let me rephrase that. Constantia is an intermediated insurer. Okay, you spoke earlier around the need to work closer with your partners. You really want to integrate your strategy. You want to integrate partners into your strategy. So what is Constantia doing to support the transformation of intermediaries? Because as we know, the intermediary market, is also transforming at a very slow pace. We know that regulation makes it very difficult for new entrants to come into this space. We have big challenges facing just overall, facing the intermediated market. So what is Constantia doing to help drive transformation?
Yeah, so at one level, we need to look at our own transformation. Indirectly that will help. That is something that we are looking at. In terms of how are we actually helping our partners in that sense, I'm not aware that we're helping them anywhere currently. But I think it's a good point, and that's part of the conversations we should have. So if that is an issue with our brokers, we should be talking about it. If our policy wordings are an issue, we should be talking about it. If our pricing is an issue, we should be talking about it. We need to be having those conversations because that's the only way we can help one another. So happy to have the conversation.
How do you see the industry covering these types of risks into the future? I know that even from an FIA perspective, there's a lot happening behind the scenes. Globally, I mean, there's conversations with OECD, there's conversations with IIS, but what are your views? I mean, I don't think it's...
Again, if you take big global disasters and you take Hurricane Andrew and things like that, and, that started creating, various relief funds, SASRIA in this country, we don't know yet, but it's not, it's not impossible that, we create a SASRIA for, infectious disease disasters. I mean, there's no question that, rightly or wrongly, there's no question that those contingent BI extensions in the policy, no one ever envisaged a global lockdown. People might have envisaged a pandemic, but there's no ways anybody envisaged global lockdown. Now, that's not to say that that's a reason not to pay a claim. I'm not suggesting that, and we don't need to get into the legal technicalities around the policies. But now that we know that what that potential implication is, that's the reason why, across the world, everywhere, the reinsurers and insurers have withdrawn that cover because now they actually understand the risk and that there is actually a real risk of this happening. So then the question is now, if that comes back, how do you price that risk? And that's very difficult because this is the first time something like this has happened. So that's, very hard from there to try and actually work out any scientific pricing, how regular this might be and, how broadly, in terms of spread? Will the next one be, or will it be more isolated? So it will test us as an industry, but I think also, governments around the world will also be dealing with this because they've had to take the brunt of it now. And we hope they help us get through this as well. I'm talking broadly about the economy, but we don't have the answers. But it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. Maybe somebody will be very bold and say, well, this is a 1 in 1,000-year or 1 in 100-year event. I'm going to go out and offer a policy to cover this specific scenario because I don't expect that it'll happen again in my lifetime. But I think people would say at this stage you're very brave, but who knows?
Then if we can just move on to the MedMal ethical business. Okay. Some of the questions that came through from the brokers was, what is the vision and the way forward for that business? If you can maybe just enlighten us on that.
Yeah, I mean, our medical malpractice business has been, one of the highlights, Constantia. It's I always say to people it's a scary business because it's got such a long tail to it. So one has to have one's eyes, wide open when one's underwriting those risks. So currently in that space, we are quite focused in terms of, the various professions within the medical profession, the various sort of specialists, etc., where we provide cover. But our longer term vision is to grow in that space, absolutely. But we will we will grow in a manner which is appropriate for the type of business that we are underwriting. South Africa traditionally has not been a very litigious society, but that is changing. You just have to hear on the radio and on television, there's more and more advertising about, how we can help you recover damages. And, lawyers can now obviously work on contingencies and the like. So, that's what feels more of a litigious society. Look, we're a long way off from the likes of the US and Australia and places like that. Undoubtedly, but we have to be conscious of that those dynamics will change over time. But we're absolutely committed to that business. We see good opportunity. We've been very successful in terms of growing that business, and it continues to remain the focus. And to do it properly as well, we have to make sure that we have again the right systems to support that business to make sure that we are doing it properly.
Do you see an opportunity to expand into the African markets, or?
It's not something we've considered as yet. Very much focused on the local market. I think the other thing is, just to make a point, I think what's also important, to share with you and and your members as well, is that it's also important that we can't be all things to everybody, and that's never going to be our intention. And that again comes back to communication, because we should. We mustn't lead people up a path, and lead them to think that we are going to be able to do this and that and all sorts of, weird and wonderful things. It's about ensuring that there's clarity. This is what we can do, and this is what we can't do. If we look at an opportunity, we must make a decision quickly, and we must just be clear in terms of that. So let us not try and, be something that we are not. And then, or dabble in something where we haven't properly considered it, and then we have to withdraw. So I don't want to be in a position, where we do that. I mean, as you know, we've cancelled lots of books of business in the recent past. That hits our credibility terribly. We don't want to be jumping into relationships and promising the world, and then, the first speed bump we hit, we run for the hills. That's not how do we build a sustainable business and sustainable relationships. So we've made those mistakes, 100%. We must learn from those mistakes, and going forward, we must make sure we've got the right partners and we've got the right relationships with those partners. And that's a two-way thing. We have some brokers that maybe have 1 or 2 policies with us. That's also not sustainable. So, how do we sit down and agree together how we grow that? What do we need to be doing differently? Where do we meet each other and find a common ground and find common opportunities? But let's be open and transparent on both sides in terms of those conversations.
Thanks, Peter. Just as a final question on the ethical business, it is our understanding here that you have recently offered premium deferments for a period of time. Are there alternative options being explored for doctors that are still struggling to pay premiums during the pandemic? And I think earlier on in the conversation you did mention that you still acknowledge that this particular market segment is struggling. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so just keep watching that space. Something will come out tomorrow specifically on the doctors. So we will be offering more relief there.
Very encouraging. Thank you, Peter. Okay, so there were some general questions, and I think maybe what we can do is just touch on some of those. One was, do you have an update on your personal lines black box rating engine? And is it up and running? So
I am told that it is complete, it is up and running. I think with all of these things, it's getting them into the various systems. And having a plethora of systems that we work through, it's quicker and easier with some than it is with others it seems. But otherwise, that's there. And unless, Heidi, I've got it completely wrong.
Absolutely, Peter. It's actually our orange box. Constantia is orange. Yeah, it's our curator system, Lizelle. It's been rolled out to most of the systems. Absolutely, it's working. Thank you.
A question came up regarding the sort of product focus of Constantia, and would you be expanding into the guarantee markets? Is that something you guys are considering?
We have a great business in the guarantee market through a partner, through SGI. So if you're interested in those products, just contact Heidi and the team, and they'll introduce you to Lucian and team. They do a fantastic job in that space. And
it will remain a part of the Constantia product suite going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then there was an interesting question around why Constantia do not underwrite asset type policies. Heidi, do you want to maybe touch on that, or Peter?
Yeah, I guess that's probably more a risk appetite issue. And again, to me, that comes back to, we can't be all things to everybody. We need to, walk before crawl before we walk, before we run. And, so we have to prioritize. That's not to say that we will not go into that space into the future. But, we need to understand, if we're going to go into that, we need to understand how do we, enter into that space, how do we grow in that space? Because we don't want to go into something and just because it's opportunistic on a particular policy or particular client, particular relationship, and then we get burnt and then we run for the hills again. Come back to that point. So, it must be considered, and then we must do it properly.
Thanks, Peter. And I know you've sort of touched on it through the conversation today around, where you think the broker needs to take some credit in terms of what they do for customers, and obviously the Constantia strategy to work closely with them and support them. What is the one message that you would want to leave with your partners today? So at the end of this webinar, what is that message?
My message is it's about communication. I want to know. I want to know what we can be doing better, what we can do differently, and I want to know where the opportunities are. I don't want us to be sitting trying to figuring out. Well, we think this is a great opportunity. And then, so we head off in a direction. We should be talking to our partners, our brokers, and getting that feedback. So to that point about, the asset policies, let's have that conversation. So I'm not saying that, now it's a case of sort of appetite, but it's not a case of that we will never do it, but let's understand what that opportunity is. And, if we can find a way that makes sense, then we'll do it. But we must do our homework properly. and not just dive into it. So that requires that communication. So I just say, guys, keep talking. I've always had and will always have a very open approach. One of my bugbears in life is that people who think they are too important, or to talk to other people, or that people are superior. We're all equal in this world. We all end up I always say to people, we always end up in the same pile of ash. And I often get people saying to me on a call to say, thanks for your time, you must be really busy. And I'm sure I'm no busier than anybody else. Just because I'm a CEO of an insurance company doesn't make me more busy than somebody else, right? So we're all busy. So we can all have open conversations, and let's just be open and honest with one another. And if we can make things work, that's what I want at the end of the day. And that's what's important.
We will open up the question and answers now to see if there are any of our participants in this webinar that have any specific questions that they'd like to raise with Peter. Heidi, I know you've been monitoring it quite carefully, so I don't know if there are any questions that you want to pose to Peter before we end off.
What is the percentage share of short-term versus life insurance in Constantia, and the sustainability of the short-term insurance line of business?
Our life business is, so the majority of our business is short-term, but of that, the biggest part of our business is our health businesses. So that's, gap cover, primary health, in that space.
Okay. And the last question, Peter, is around our off-platform versus on-platform strategy. So what is our strategy going forward on that?
Yeah, so I think the strategy is going to be driven by, what is the need in the market. So at the moment, we are primarily an off-platform business. We have a very small amount of business that is done so-called on-platform. It's really about, what do our partners want from us? So if we can serve, both of those, let's call them segments for want of a better word, we need to have that flexibility to do that. But again, it's also demand driven. So on-platform is not a major focus of ours at the moment, because the majority of our business is off-platform. And that's where I want our team to focus, is what we have already, those relationships we have. Let's get that working better. Then we start pushing in another direction, and then we then take our focus away from what we currently have.
Wonderful, thanks, Peter. Lizelle, any questions from your side?
Well, I think there was an interesting question that came up around if I'm an intermediary, if I'm a broker, if I'm a partner of Constantia, and I'm interested in doing business or referring business to other lines within the Constantia group. How do they go about that? Do they have to become a sort of qualified or an accredited intermediary to be able to refer business, or do you have an internal network structure that they could potentially tap into?
Sure, good question. Actually, I don't have an answer, but let's have the conversation. So I don't know who's asked that, but I'm sure Heidi will follow up. But absolutely, let's have the conversation. But I really don't have an answer.
Peter, just one more question just popped in.
Yeah.
What is Constantia's strategy on agribusiness? We went in. We originally had a partner, as those in that business would know, and then sadly they left us. And so we are edging our way back into that market. I know there's some issues just around the wordings and making sure that those are sort of updated and are relevant. So it is an area that we will be going back into. Whether we are, Heidi, you'll be closer to it as well, I guess, so you can also fill in the gaps there. But my understanding is that we haven't pushed hard yet in that space, and it's more to do with just making sure we've got all our ducks in a row. Absolutely. Just to add, Peter, I mean, we're definitely in business for agribusiness. We actually busy right now building a new product or making it a bit more sexy, bells and whistles. But we're currently sitting with an old product or old policy wording, and we're busy updating. So yes, we are in a market for agribusiness. Okay.
And that's assets, just by the way. We're not.
Yeah, for assets.
We're not in the.
Let's
we're
make
not
it
in the
clear.
crop. Yeah.
Not on crop. Agree, Peter. Thank you for that.
So those were all the questions from my side. I don't know if Heidi's got anything else from her side. I think I just want to end off by saying it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. As I said, it really is. It's nice to be able to be honest about where we are, what the plans are, the transparency. I mean, it really comes back to your philosophy around making it more personal. I know brokers are very, very, very much relationship driven, and that is how they build their businesses. That is how they service their customers. But I think as an industry, we have to probably realize that it's not businesses, it's not business as usual anymore. And I think it's been really insightful talking around what you foresee for the future and what your ambitions are for your business. So I can just say thank you to Alex and Joe, Heidi and yourself for including me today. But I don't have any more questions for you. I feel like you got off lightly, but I don't have any more.
Yeah, I think I did, Lizelle. But I think from my side as well, thank you for agreeing to participate. And the intention, as I said in the beginning, was always, I didn't want to sit with a whole lot of scripted answers, to a bunch of questions, and I certainly didn't want to have death by PowerPoint over Zoom. So the idea was to really just have that authentic conversation. And I was actually just reflecting myself to think that I'm not sure how many insurance CEOs in terms of their careers, have spent more time as a broker than as an insurer. I am certainly one of those. I'm not sure how many there are out there. So, I want to use that to our advantage, because I understand that market. I understand the pressures. I understand the dynamics. That's why, to me, the communication, two-way communication, is so critical. You have to have a relationship. As a broker, you have to have a relationship with your insurer, because we both need one another. And in times of crisis, even more so, as we've discussed earlier, that heightens the need for communication. And we need to be called out, we need to be said, listen, we're getting it wrong here. And at the same time, I hope it's not just negative conversation, but also positive one to say, look, there's opportunity here. How can we take advantage of that opportunity together? So, that at the end of the day is a key message I would, hopefully has landed with everybody. But I'll make sure from our team's perspective that that's the culture we build within Constantia.
All right, look, there's no more questions, Lizelle. We're coming to the end of the webinar. So thank you, Lizelle and Peter, for a very insightful and robust session. I think our partners have appreciated your openness, Peter. You being open and transparent. We're waiting, obviously, for their feedback. But to all our partners, once again, thank you for attending our webinar today. We hope that you have enjoyed the session, and we look forward to the exciting times ahead at the new Constantia as we work with you to ensure prosperity for both our businesses and customers. Just a reminder that if we have not covered your question, please do reach out to me after the webinar. We'll also email each of you a link to the recording of this webinar, and we are incredibly excited, and we're so looking forward to engaging with you, all of you, again soon. So from our side, thank you. Please stay safe and warm, and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Lizelle.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.